I would request all of you to please settle down, take your seats, clear the aisle. We'll start with the plenary session. I request all of you to please take your seats. We'll now proceed with our plenary session where we'll discuss the approach to integrated sustainability when faced with the grand challenge of rapid urbanization. Cities across the world, including India, are growing rapidly, placing a great strain on resources. Unless urban solutions are developed, cities will continue to deplete resources, increase temperatures, and contribute to chronic poverty. For this discussion, we have on stage, and please join your hands together in welcoming our distinguished speakers of this panel on stage. We have Professor Helen Lochhead, the Dean of Faculty of Built Environment, UNSW Sydney. Ms. Lochhead is an architect and urban designer with over 20 years of senior management and project delivery experience in both private and public sectors in Australia and the United States. We have Professor David Sanderson, the lead of UNSW Rapid Urbanization Grand Challenge, Faculty of Built Environment, UNSW Sydney. Professor Sanderson holds a PhD in Urban Livelihoods and Vulnerability. In recent years, he has led the post-disaster reviews in Haiti, Pakistan, India, the Philippines and Nepal. We also have on stage Mr. Peter Søgaard, M.Sc Biologist, Project Manager, City of Aarhus. Mr. Søgaard is a biologist, M.Sc in the Technical and Environmental Department of the Municipality of Aarhus, Denmark. He has more than 12 years of practical experience working with stream, forest and ecosystem management. We have Dr. Madhumita Roy. She's a professor and former head of Department of Architecture at Jadhavpur University. She was the founder, director of the School of Planning and Architecture, Amity University, Kolkata. She has served in various capacities in different government departments like Kolkata Municipal Corporation, the West Bengal Housing Board, the West Bengal Housing Infrastructure Development Corporation, among others. And of course, we have Dr. Ajay Mathur, President GRIHA Council and Director General of TERI. A round of applause for all our speakers who have gathered on stage here. I would request Dr. Mathur to kindly, first of all, I think we'll take a group photograph. Since all of you are on stage, I request all of you to please stand for a group photograph. I would now request Dr. Ajay Mathur to kindly introduce the theme of the session. Please welcome Dr. Ajay Mathur.
Colleagues, we begin with this first session which focuses on the grand challenge of urbanization. In almost every country of the world, urbanization is a challenge. It's a challenge for different reasons in different parts of the world. In India, it is a challenge because we are looking at three things happening at once. Cities are growing, that's one. But the second is that as we move towards making the cities livable, there is a range of issues that we need to consider, that the buildings are friendly, apart from being resource efficient, that the infrastructure, the mobility is such that it helps people to move, whether it is to their work or it is for leisure. We need to ensure that there are spaces where people can speak, can play, kids can play, people can talk. So that's the second. And the third is the growing challenge of ensuring that we reduce and ultimately go to zero as far as our emissions are concerned. And the issue in countries like India is that all those three things are happening simultaneously. But it also is a place for huge opportunities. It's a place for opportunities in as much as you grow infrastructure, can we design it? Can people start living in it so that it meets all the three goals? If I look at urbanization in the city of Delhi itself, in the 40 years or so that I've lived in this city, one of the very interesting things is that the 6 or 7 satellites of Delhi, in fact, it's even difficult to call them satellites. Some are part of town, like Dwarka or Vasant Kunj and so on, all of which have been developed in the last 30 years. And then you have cities like Gurgaon, Noida. Each of these is a fully working, fully populated urban conglomeration, but within the larger Delhi concept. Is this the way that we will move ahead? If it is, then we need to make sure that we can get these satellites and the mother city to talk to each other as well. And talking is more than just telecommunications. It's also about people being able to move from one to the other, but in a manner that makes the vast bulk of movement within the satellite towns. There are obviously other challenges in other parts of the world. If the cities are not growing, then the challenge is how do you convert the infrastructure into infrastructure that is climate friendly, that is resource efficient, though over longer cycles than you would have in cities like Delhi. All of this has to be done in a manner that is affordable. So we are looking at affordability, we are looking at livability, we are looking at planet sustainability together. This session provides a platform for the renowned experts who have here from various disciplines and practitioners to talk about how this can be done, about the kinds of ways in which these challenges have been met, and how do we look at possible solutions coming together. With that, can I hand over to Dean Lochhead for taking this ahead. Thank you. Helen, all yours.
Oops, sorry, I'm just going to have to rearrange this a little bit. Can you just stop? Yes. Is it going to appear up there? Oh, you have to rearrange the settings. So can you arrange the things that's not... Oh well, okay, everything's going to be fat. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. Can you sort that out? Okay, great. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. In the built environment, proportions are very important. Thank you, Ajay, for the introduction. I'm just going to set a scene based on work we're doing in Sydney. And while Sydney is a very different context to Delhi, or indeed many cities around the world, there are many lessons which are equally applicable. Sydney is considered one of the most livable cities of the world. It is a city of 5 million people, but like many cities around the world, it is growing exponentially. This is what we think of as being Sydney, but that little white square is only a very small segment of what is the greater Sydney metropolitan area. And as we are seeing everywhere throughout the world, it is growing at a rate and pace we've never experienced before. By 2050, the city will be 80% larger than it is today. And with that comes a range of challenges, not just environmental challenges, but social and economic disparity. And you can see by this map the spatial divide that is occurring between the haves and the have-nots in our city today. And that is only going to get worse if we don't do something about it. The suburbanization of disadvantage in Sydney is one of our most pressing urban challenges. It plays out in terms of low density sprawl with poor access to transport, work, employment and educational opportunities, low amenity, poor infrastructure, and an increased dependency on cars and without that public transport infrastructure. And the consequences are dire. Air pollution is extreme, and with that comes chronic health impacts such as asthma, diabetes, increased flooding, heat island impacts related to higher temperatures in the West, and so it goes on. So with these urban challenges, we actually have an increasing conglomeration of environmental challenges, of degradation of land. We've heard about climate impacts, as well as social challenges, health challenges, and with this cluster effect, business as usual is not an option, and it isn't in Sydney. But with that imperative comes an opportunity to do things differently. We can no longer have single-based solutions, but we have to actually have multi-purpose, multifaceted solutions to actually deal with these challenges. They're complex, and they need an integrated response. That requires strategies at every scale, small and large, strategic and tactical, working together. And then when we do work at multiple scales and have interventions from the strategic to the small, we can actually address multiple agendas. And this is what we're trying to do with tackling problems at every scale. And with this becomes innovation and integration. So I would suggest that an integrated approach to urbanism is going to have a much greater impact in terms of multiple benefits. And that starts off with having an evidence-based decision-making to your approaches. We need strong research to form an evidence base to really put in place policies which are robust and enduring, and that actually will inform better practice. So let's start with research. At our faculty at the University of New South Wales, we are very much focused on shaping future cities, and cities which are fundamentally more resilient, informed, healthy, smart, connected, green, livable, and inclusive. And that requires us working together. In our faculty, we not only focus on high-performing built environments to ensure that they are more climate and carbon sensitive, but also focused on how people engage with those environments. So that's human-centered design approaches, a socially inclusive agenda, and underpinned by new and emerging technologies to inform us in terms of that decision making. So that is the paradigm in which we work. And examples of that are the CRC for Low Carbon Living, which was mentioned earlier, led by Deo Prasad, been very instrumental in developing new cut-through policies and initiatives, including the Cooling Sydney strategy. The City Futures Research Centre, which is providing analytical data and increased information on housing affordability in Sydney and the importance of well-being in terms of livability of our city. So we know over 90% of Australia's population live in cities, and greenhouse gas emissions are one of the hugest contributors to the demise of the urban environment. But the issue in Australia, and it is different in different cities, is that 60% of the built environment already exists today, as opposed to infrastructure, which is actually being replaced and growing fundamentally at a rapid rate. So we need new and innovative infrastructure, but we also need to look at retrofitting and reusing and adapting the built environment to be part of the solution. It is not a matter of delete, replace. If we're talking about an integrated, more sustainable future, it's a matter of actually working with what exists, improving it, repairing it, regenerating it, and renewing it, as well as introducing new cut-through infrastructure. So in this hypothesis, urban regeneration and new, green, innovative infrastructure are fundamental to more sustainable, resilient cities. And so here are some of the initiatives being undertaken in Sydney. In policy, this research has informed the Metro strategy and also the work of the City of Sydney, who's leading the way in terms of developing a more resilient, inclusive city. And these are a number of policies which not only underpin an economic future for the city, but a greener and carbon positive future which is inclusive of all. It is fundamentally based on what is good for the environment is good for people and good for the economy. It has also informed a vision for the city, which is a green parkland city, of the harbour city, the river city, and the western parkland city, of not the western parkland city not being a place of the periphery of the disadvantaged, but a place to refocus and introduce the amenity of the harbour city further west. Of course, that means new infrastructure, including a new second airport, new rail and metro connections, and this is played out in terms of this diagram for the future planning of up to 2050 of the Western city, but also in retrofitting town centres and creating jobs closer to transport nodes, as well as urban amenities and community services. Some of these are new town centres, and some of those are improved and are retrofitted. And that also includes making it more livable for people to actually have active lifestyles with high amenity. In Western Sydney, the temperatures can be up to 10 degrees hotter than in Eastern City, closer to the coast and the harbour, and so creating green and blue infrastructure, which enhances that amenity, is absolutely fundamental to cooling the environment, as well as creating a more amenable place and healthier place to live. So places for people, new parklands, new green links, and fundamentally none of this can happen if we don't look after what exists. And that's about protecting the natural and environmental assets, the land uses and resources that we have, not only the existing natural resources, but the agricultural land and the biodiversity to build resilience to future hazards. We know we have plenty of hazards, both precipitous, such as the bushfires we've been experienced recently, but also the slow-moving stresses that we need to accommodate. So without good planning, none of these can be addressed. So here is an example of maintaining and renewing the waterways. So policies such as greener places have informed the Sydney Green Grid, the idea of connecting not only blue infrastructure, green infrastructure, transport, and cycles and active walking. In practice, that plays out through a number of projects, and I just want to give you a few case studies of how that plays out at a smaller scale. So for me, sustainability starts at the region. If we don't deal with the urban response, resilience, sustainability, integration cannot happen at the scale of the room. So we need to have all of these scales working together. So starting at the urban scale, green and blue infrastructure are fundamental to developing resilience and livability. Here is a project that we piloted in Parramatta some time ago, looking at the spatial deficit of access to green space. The areas in pink were mapped, and what we could see was many of the inhabitants did not have access to green space. We also then actually were able to identify that those connections to green waterways, to actually ensuring we can manage flood, and also connect people through active transport, could also be tied in, and this was the fundamental underpinning of the Sydney Green Grid. Small interventions, a big strategy with small interventions can incrementally add up to a connected system, which is both resilient and provides amenity. Connecting infrastructure is not just about green space, but it's about active transport, and good urban design is fundamental to that. In the City Futures Research Centre, analysis was done on cycling patterns in Sydney, and what was found was that while there is an appetite for cycling, the infrastructure is poor. It not only mapped out the infrastructure was poor, but that in fact there were very different patterns of usage of the network by women and men, and you can see that in the red and the blue mapped on this diagram here. Fundamental to that was the issue of safety and security for women, and the solution, of course, is well-designed cycle infrastructure, which of course augments the green grid. So this green grid is not only a place for connecting the greenery of the city, but it's also an opportunity to connect cycleways, active transport, pedestrians, and make Sydney a safer, more integrated a city for all people, especially women who also want to be active cyclists as well as transport users. And urban retrofit. So what does that mean? Much of the city is now being pressured for development. Areas which are otherwise identified as not suitable for urban renewal of her housing for commercial activity or former industrial lands. But these lands are increasingly being redeveloped, and we need to ensure that when we do it better than before. This is an example of a project I was involved in some years ago at Victoria Park in Sydney, formerly swampland, flood-prone, still flood-prone, and yet the urban proposition to deal with that was actually to make fundamentally water management key to the urban regeneration of the area. The whole street and block structure are generated around the ability to collect and retain water, to reuse it and recycle it. Gutters such as along the street you see here were designed to be leaky, to actually take water in, to filter it before it was reused and reclaimed and used in detention basins in the public domain, and also reused in other parts. And here you can see it's used in water fountains and elements, as well as the park becoming a detention basin during peak areas of rain. So it makes a development which is not only suitable for living, but something which was environmentally an improvement on what there was before. This area no longer floods, and the water is all reused, recycled, and repurposed. So it has multiple benefits: a new place to live, as well as dealing with a remediated landscape. But it's not only the urban areas, it's the suburban areas that we need to focus on. And creating an amenity and purposeful open space in the suburbs is even more important, where much is leftover space. It's also an issue I see increasingly in India, where new development is happening in isolation, in random settings, without the integration to existing urban centres. In the periphery of Sydney, this is even more profound, where large tracts of land are unusable. We did this study with the Western Sydney Council a few years ago at mapping the increasing cost of this residual space to the community and to the public coffers. It cost millions of dollars every year just to mow the unused areas of grass along roads and drainage easements. We came up with a strategy to actually look at that space in a much more integrated way through restoring degraded waterways, by dechannelizing existing stormwater culverts, which has actually been done in this project here in Blacktown, by reforesting, by either through plantations or through regeneration of existing landscapes, introducing productive landscapes and market gardens, which is employed in other parts of Sydney, and including new forms of agriculture, and reorienting the edges, so housing which used to turn its back on these drainage areas actually turns its front on it, and it becomes an amenity for the community and a useful open space connected with cycling and walkways. So by taking a more integrated approach at the strategic urban scale, which informs policy and practice, we can see that we can make the city not only more sustainable, but more livable and sustainable and more equitable. And that's a way we can achieve a much greater impact through integrated, sustainable approaches. Thank you. I'd just like to introduce our next speaker. So over to you. Thank you.
Very good morning to all the esteemed dignitaries on dais and all the dignitaries present as audience in the audience. Now, before I begin, I'd like to mention that I have a very unusual background. As mentioned in the introduction, that I am into teaching for 20 years' time, and thus involved with research and other activities. But before joining teaching, I was in 2 different government departments, starting from corporation, housing board, new township project, and lot of other areas. And I am closely working with different government departments till now. Now today's topic is challenges to rapid urbanization. Challenge is always good because innovation starts when there is a challenge. Now, the first and foremost issue, but I find that we have a very generic definition regarding urban area. Since 1951, this definition is continuing with a little bit change, and which is basically based on the population and the population density. Now, our country is developing with decades, and we have not changed the definition of urban area. Now, this is one issue, and with this, another issue is very much linked, that is mismatch in estimations in population. Now, when any guest from outside visit a city or an urban area, now how do they feel that, how do they understand that this is a different urban area? This is Kolkata, this is Delhi, this is Mumbai, only by looking at the structures. Now, we have never taken into consideration about the physical planning parameters into the definition of urban area. Our cities, as we all know, our cities are formed by default and not by design. So, there are areas which are defined as cities, urban agglomerations, metropolitan cities, towns, but we have a lot of gray areas in between which are also developing, which also is termed as urban areas. How to understand, how to go about with the planning of these areas? Now, being presently I'm acting as a SIA member in government for Government of West Bengal. Now, in the last 3 years, I found at least 40 to 45 projects which are coming up in rural context only. It is not falling in the city limits, within the city limits. So, lot of gated communities, because now presently we are having affordable housing schemes. So, lot of projects are coming in the rural context without any infrastructure. Now, FAR and FSI, this is an important tool, as we all know, in the building rules and regulations. Now, in the entire country, this FSI value, it varies from, say, from 1.5 to 5.5. Other cities in other countries, they are having higher FSI values. Now, our building rule document, what I found, because I am engaged with this formulation of building rules since for past 20 years time, what I found that these are the documents which are copied and edited form of earlier building rules. We need to think afresh about our own cities. These are our cities. In the building rules and regulations, other parameters which are called ground coverage, building heights, use category, parking norms, lot of other things are there. Now, what about when we find the pictures like these in our cities? These are the cities. Interestingly, people like to have extras. They don't want what is mentioned in the building rule as FSI. They always want more, an extra floor, additional area in the form of cupboards. And we find pleasure in doing violations, because in the building rule document, there is a clause for regularization. If we do anything wrong, we can regularize that in near future. So that is our understanding. These pictures clearly shows that we are having high-rise, high-density buildings in a contiguous plot where we find high density medium rise buildings, which means that we can have higher heights in just adjacent plot because we have a blanket affair for the entire city. How can we have a blanket FSI value for the entire city? Because our city is not the same, similar, every part of a city is not similar. Another interesting point is that we find same cities everywhere. The 4 pictures are one from Kolkata, one from Delhi, Noida, one from Bangalore, and one from Navi Mumbai. Now, the aspiration of people and the designers to become same. We want to be same. How can we have same buildings, same cities in the entire country? Our country is known because of its diversity. But where are those implications? 10 years back, we were engaged in one research and developmental work by Kolkata Municipal Corporation, where we wanted to study the existing FSI value of the entire city. We took up the project and we studied each and every uses of each and every building in the city. And we found that it is very interesting to note that our city can be categorized, I am talking only for Kolkata city, it can be categorized into so many categories. Now, I have highlighted industrial in red only to mention that as per UNDPFI guidelines, we can't have residential use adjacent to industrial use. But we are all aware that we can find these type of structures everywhere in our cities. Now, a building rule document should have a basis behind its formulation, and those bases should be activities, historicity of the city, building typology, economic networks, environment. There can be might more, but these are the points which we chalked out during that work. I categorize that the entire city into 3 zones. One is low stress zone, where the FSI value was below 2. The medium stress zone, where the FSI value varied from 2 to 5. And the stressed zone, the FSI value, the existing FSI value, we found it as more than 5, and it was extending up to 12. Now, if this is the present scenario of a city, then what is the purpose of our building rule document, where the permissible limits says that it can be only 2.75? My question is that, are we not ignoring some of the existing facts which are there in the city? A building rule document, whether it is only for the new projects, new buildings, then what will happen to the existing old cities? Beside this, we have lot of other guidelines like National Building Code, UNDPFI guidelines, and MOEF guidelines. Now, these are, people understand the difference between rule and guideline. People are not bothered. They don't realize that guidelines are also framed by professionals with lot of thought process. So, we don't care. We don't care. And what we care, what we can see above the ground, what we need, lot of things are happening underground because of our actions. We need to be careful about those items, those actions. Whose city cities are in transition. In one of our research project, we found that people living in the slum areas, every year I take my students to each slum and to one rural area, remote rural area. So we surveyed the socio-economic and the settlement pattern of those areas. Now, there we found that slum dwellers who is living in the slum or squatters, they are having one smartphone with them. And the physical structures are like this. All are documented. Do we really care about what is happening in and around ourselves? Recently, we are engaged in one R&D project, impact of urbanization on birds' habitat in Kolkata. Now we have started counting birds in the city. Now I tried for the funding for this project for last 6 years. No one listened to me, and everyone still they are laughing at me. Why the Department of Architecture will be working on birds' nest or birds' habitat? We are working in collaboration with the Department of Zoology and Botany. Definitely, I am not an expert in, I am not an ornithologist and ornithologist, and neither I am an expert in those areas. But my interest was that birds have a very strong connection with the trees. And as an architect, planner, urban designer, we are designing trees, we are planting trees for the beautification of cities. How much do we care for others? A city for whom means for whom? Only for humans. In the last week, I had been to Shanghai. Shanghai is a smart city, but we struggle to find one single bird in the city. It's a beautiful, nice city. Where are the birds? Where are they going? Trees are there. So it is not to document only the greens. Consciously, we have to be responsible. All have to be responsible. Facts, what I believe that facts not known to us. Number one, vision. How we want to see our city in 50 years' time, in 100 years' time, in 20 years' time. We don't know. Whose responsibility is to think about the vision? Our political leaders, our planners. We don't know the actual population, how many people are coming, how many people are residing in the city, both regular and floating. So how can we make the arrangement for the facilities which have to be there for catering that number of people? Existing FSI, FAR value, we don't know. Existing resources, we don't know. What is our soil condition? How much water do we have? What is the condition of our air? Whenever you start any research project, you will find that we don't know. We don't have adequate data to start that work. Land classification data. We don't know exactly where, which use category land is there. Existing limitations. We don't understand our existing limitations. And this is interesting to note that in our country, we have top-class bureaucrats, top-class technocrats, and excellent manpower. But we have very little coordination in between each other and very little respect for each other. We don't have enough coordination among ourselves. Thus, lack of preparedness delays the whole process and also create new risks which threaten to erode current development gains. We are never prepared with the facts and figures. Thus, when the JNU program was launched long back, we were not prepared. Recently, when the Smart City program was launched, we were not prepared, and thus it took a lot of time in the implementation process. But on the other hand, the fact is that urbanites are exposed to all kind of technological advancements. Now, how to bridge? We are smart, but our cities are not coping up with the smartness, smart technologies. We need to give enough respect and enough responsibility. We need to have enough responsibility as planners and the entire physical planning process. Thank you. This is at the end. Okay.
I don't know, should I be doing something to set this up? I should not. Good afternoon. My PowerPoint is short. I apologize, I'm using a PowerPoint. I'll speak for no more than 8-9 minutes. And what I'd like to talk about is the confluence of these three words, urbanization, risk, and transparency. And we've heard a lot about urbanization already. And how do I move forward? Ah, wonderful. Great. Thank you. Excuse me. We're unprepared. At least I'm unprepared. Okay, just to say, well, very quickly, we all know it's an urbanizing world. City growth around the world is just shy of 1.5 million people a week, which is an astonishing figure. And we're in an urban world, and that has strengths and weaknesses, and you can draw your own conclusions based on whether you think that's a good or a bad thing. On the right is one of the many graphs that exist talking about over time our planet is warming up. We know that. We had very eloquent conversation this morning about climate change, which we are clearly a part of. All the evidence points to that. This talks about water and weather and climate change going up. Other disasters, such as earthquake disasters, are on the increase, and I'll come back to where I say that with a degree of certainty. What I want to mention is when these two worlds come together, and we have disasters in urban areas, and of course, they're dreadful and awful. On the top right is an official from Japan after the 2011 earthquake in the sea that caused the tsunami. And he's pointing to where the city used to be, and behind is what the city is now. And you get the picture of total destruction in a country that's extraordinarily well prepared for disasters, probably the most prepared in the world. Bottom right is, in fact, the Kashmir earthquake, which affected, of course, India and Pakistan. In 2005, flimsy buildings that fell down to kill people, and earthquake deaths are caused by buildings that fall down. The bottom left happens to be Typhoon Haiyan in Tacloban in 2013 in the Philippines, and that ship was picked up and landed on top of a community living in an area just by the coast there, a low-income settlement. And the top left is Haiti, the terrible earthquake you may recall from 2010, where between 50 and 220,000 people died. No one really knows how many. The poorest country in the Western world, and there's a reason why that disaster was so bad. And that's because disasters aren't only natural. I'm sure almost everybody in this room has seen this. They're not only natural. The terrible effects in New Zealand just over a week ago of the volcano. Now, if nobody had been on that crater, that would have been a beautiful sight. The fact that 16 people died makes it a disaster. So that's vulnerability. The side that we can control, and I'm going to use that word, is vulnerability. So earthquakes are bad and kill people because of vulnerable conditions. And that's got well, and that plays out. This is, these are both BBC. There are other news outlets available. I'm English, and I just happened to look at the BBC. That one on the left is from just 3 days ago, and there was a terrible earthquake in Albania a month ago, killed 51 people. And that story is talking about a number of people have been brought forward charges of murder because of a so-called natural disaster. And that's really interesting. That building fell down because of, it was built illegally. On the right, the Sichuan earthquake from 2008 that killed just shy of 70,000 people was a terrible disaster in China. And that photograph is, in fact, a government official who's asking forgiveness of local people because schools and hospitals fell down. Now, that's really strange. New buildings fell down with excellent building codes. And you can see where I'm going here on that. That shouldn't have happened. The reason it happened, a big part of that is corruption. That's not just anecdote. A piece of research in Nature Journal from 8-9 years ago correlated the amount of so-called natural disasters and corrupt countries. Those more corrupt, I should be very, very clear, all countries have levels of corruption. Those more corrupt correlated to where disasters were worse. That's not coincidence, and that's a very authoritative piece of work. Please look at that. And the definition I'm using here is abuse of entrusted power for personal gain. Abuse of entrusted power for personal gain. And that's got some of us thinking about this. A few of us who have been involved in disaster management, humanitarian aid for decades, in fact. And we're starting a new initiative. And this new initiative, we haven't even got a title yet. We're calling it Transparency, Accountability, and Disasters. And so far, it's a group of us. It's the built environment at UNSW Sydney. It's a very well-known and respected NGO, Seeds India, founded by Dr. Anshu Sharma, who's in fact sitting at the back there. The Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, which is around humanitarian action, and our friends at the University of Technology in Sydney. And the question we're asking is, what made the disaster so bad? What made it so bad? It's not just the natural phenomenon that makes this so bad. So we've started digging, we started looking, and we found this conference, which was just over 2 weeks ago, in fact. And you know, when you jump from one world to the other, a parallel world, you find all kinds of activity. You just haven't happened to have peeked into that world. And of course, there's lots on corruption and infrastructure. This conference was in Hanoi 2 weeks ago, organized by the OECD and the ADB. There were about 200 people there, and it was fascinating. And there were lots of organizations. I just picked just a few there. The Infrastructure Transparency Initiative, Integrity Action, which is a citizen-led monitoring of corruption. Transparency, probably the most famous one with their Perceptions of Corruption Index that they've pushed out now for 24 years. iPaidAbribe.com, which is an Indian organization, you're probably knowing it, which charts and maps and collects good stories of not paying bribes and bad stories, and is there. But less so on disasters and corruption, what caused the disaster. We found a little bit, we found some, we're starting to dig, we're finding more, but what we have found, unsurprisingly, is sobering. If you look at the diagram on the right, and I'm not inviting you to read that, I'm just putting that up to demonstrate a bit of the complexity of the webs and the connections, and even be able to discuss this issue and what it all means. That's from the World Economic Forum, has great intelligence on their website. Just 2 quotes, I had about 20, I've just popped up 2 here. One from 2005, that's actually a very long time ago. Between, what's that, 1/5 and 2/5 of assistance at a high level from the World Bank, an estimate is stolen every year. At the bottom, the global cost of corruption, more than 5% of global GDP, that's $2.6 trillion, with over $1 trillion paid in bribes every year. And that's across the world, and that's a few years old. Just imagine if we had 1/10 of that for climate change. Just imagine if we had 100th of that for climate change, or for the things we're talking about, and what we could do about that and the changes we should make. Just imagine. Okay, so the initiative, just to wind up with my last slide, the initiative which we're engaging in, which we're at the beginning of, and I'm deliberately throwing it out there and inviting also, some of the things, obviously it's multidisciplinary, architecture, planning, built environment, but also law and political science, and people you might never normally talk to in the world you're in to connect and engage with. Research, obviously, impact, so what, obviously. Practice partnerships, engaging, building coalitions, doing stuff. Practice means maybe it's building codes. Of course it's building codes. Looking at different things and tracing what made those disasters so bad. And finally, the visualization. I wonder what a visualization of transparency, of corruption and disasters actually means, what that would literally look like. And so these are some of the things we're starting on. We're at the beginning of our story. We're just 2 or 3 months in. This is an invitation, actually. If this is interesting, please get involved. That's my email address. We've got the next launch at the end of this session, I guess, in the mahogany room. We have about 6 or 7 remaining seats. It'd be wonderful if it was packed out, because this is an interesting discussion. I've been mulling this over for a decade or more, and I've never met anybody who doesn't have a very strong opinion on this subject. And that's it.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this summit. I'm going to tell you a bit about what we think about green cities in Aarhus, in Denmark. Can you hear me? Good. Okay. Why does big cities matter? Well, big cities, it's estimated that in 2050, 70% of all people are living in cities. So this is where we get most benefits of thinking green living. And why green cities? Well, green cities are better cities. I mean, they provide new green jobs and new and better technology, but most of all, they create better and healthier lives for its citizens. And in Aarhus, I put in a map on the left. We have Germany to the south, just to orient it, and Sweden to the right. And on the left side, it's the Northern Sea and UK struggling to get out of the European Union. And we in Aarhus have an ambition of moving towards a fossil-free city in 2030. And I'm proud to say that we have already, we are halfway towards that goal by implementing most of the easy solutions, and now it's getting really difficult. From now on, we have to transform the whole city for being carbon neutral. So we have to make new ways of building, making new energy infrastructure, new ways of producing energy, and we also have to adapt to more extreme weather in the future. We are experiencing heavier downfall, and since we are a coastal city, we are also increasing the problems of increasing sea levels. So we have to make a more disaster resilient infrastructure in the city, creating a blue-green city with lots of green spaces where the water can store and be transported during heavy rains. But instead of applying more technical solutions, we want to use nature-based solutions. That means we want to use we want to apply methods that nature uses for storing water and transporting water inside and outside the city. And when we use this water and try to implement it on the surface instead of using the pipes on the ground, we have been able to create more opportunities for leisure and outdoor life. One of the first projects we made in the late 90s was reopening of the river flowing through Aarhus. Aarhus means the city by the river in Denmark. So the river we are river dwellers like many other people. And the central part of city, the river was paved, the photograph on the left. Until the mid-90s, it was a central traffic road from outside the city to the harbor area. But in the late 90s, we decided to clean the water in the river and to make a green space instead of it. So I think the construction period was about 10 years. And after that, we have created a central place with lots of green spaces for people to enjoy. This is where all activities take place during the summers. They have more photos of the river and the river areas. We're also working with water in small scales. This is a project of climate adaptation in the backyard in Aarhus. And by collecting all the rainwater from the roofs of the backyard, we have made a small pond that can handle all the water of up to a 10-year rain. in Aarhus, and at the same time it creates a lot of more biodiversity and increases the social activity in the backyards. So a lot of benefits of this approach. Also, the evidence for the benefits of green living and green surroundings are piling up. This is on the left, the recent study from University of Aarhus, documenting that if you grow up in green surroundings for the first 10 years of your life, you have up to 70% lower risk of developing mental illness later on in life. And also it's well documented that green surroundings reduces stress levels in the population. We don't work on this only by ourselves. We want to have a high level of citizen involvement in the city. And to doing that, we have, among other things, a green embassy made of willow in the city, where people can come and share their ideas and hear about initiatives in the city. It's a very popular place. Right at the end of my discussion, I will briefly speak to you about our city-to-city cooperation with Udaipur here in India. It's under the Strategic Sector Cooperation Program with the Foreign Ministry of Denmark and the Danish Embassy. And the city of Udaipur is also, they're also river dwellers and have the same challenges as we have in Aarhus. We have for sustainability outcomes. It's mainly about water balance and water management. And I want to speak to you about outcome A, which is the river and lake restoration of the Ayad River. Udaipur has a river flowing through the city, and it's polluted and has a lot of garbage. But the city wants to, Udaipur is a part of the Smart City program, and they want to create an attractive, recreative riverside that is nice to experience for citizens and tourists. So we suggested that they should do a thematic river restoration, including some of the experiences we can find along the riversides, cultural, as well as biodiversity. There's a lot of bird life in the river area, and also social activities. People are using it already. Oh, sorry. And actually we have an exhibition. If you want to know more about the project, we have an exhibition outside where you're welcome to join. And also one of my colleagues are having a presentation in the afternoon about the river project and our suggestions. And well, we don't face the same problems as they do here in India and in Australia of the lack of water. We have the opposite problem of too much water, but we are trying to consider water as a resource, not a problem. A resource for us to rearrange the city and make more green space for the people. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you to our speakers. I know we've actually run over time, and I was just wondering whether the audience has an appetite to stay a bit longer and have a Q&A, or whether we should wrap up now. Can I just have a show of hands of people who are interested in asking our panelists some questions? Oh, okay. All right. Well, I might use this opportunity to thank our panelists. I was particularly interested in the provocations of our first two speakers that really actually set the scene, some of the problems, the lack of data, the ubiquitous sameness of our cities, and the challenges of making cities which are actually fit for purpose and unique to their place, and the issues of corruption and the connection to vulnerability, that if we don't deal with these issues, we will not actually have a more sustainable future. And the more optimistic presentation that we ended with by Peter on some of the solutions, not only in Denmark, in Aarhus, but also here in India by partnering together. So I was actually delighted that was a good way to end, because it was pretty dire after David had finished his talk. I was thinking we need to actually have some good stories as well as actually revealing the challenges to get to those good stories in every situation. So thank you very much to all our speakers. Give them a round of applause, and thank you for joining us today.
Big round of applause for our moderator, Ms. Helen Lochhead, Professor Helen Lochhead. I would request Professor Helen Lochhead to please present our panelists with a small token for coming here and sharing with us their experiences and raising very pertinent questions on our cities and what we need to do. So I would request you to please present a small token to Ms. Dr. Madhumita Roy first and the other panelists. A memento for Professor David Sanderson. And a small gift for Mr. Peter Søgaard. I would request Ms. Shabnam Basi, the Secretary of the GRIHA Council, to please present Professor Helen Lochhead with a small gift from our side for coming all the way here and steering this discussion. Big round of applause for all our speakers and the moderator, Professor Helen Lochhead. So if you have heard something interesting here, I mean these presentations are very interesting, do tweet about it, do put it on social media, take it to a wider audience, and do tag us along. It's the hashtag GRIHA for all and hashtag 11GS. A big thank you to all our speakers on stage and to the moderator, Professor Helen Lochhead. We'll now move on to the thematic track of changing consumer behavior at the Silver Oak. Women in Sustainability at the Amaltas and Vernacular Architecture at the Jacaranda. So please join us at these separate venues for our thematic tracks.